I request all our delegates to kindly take their seats. I'd like to welcome all our delegates for our next session. The session topic is Cybersecurity, Public Safety and Disaster Management. I would like to invite the speakers and the panelists to please kindly come to the stage and take their seats at the dais. The chair for the session is Mr. Anil K. Sinha, Vice Chairman, Bihar State Disaster Management Authority. Mr. Anil K. Sinha. Dr. Rajveer P. Sharma, Additional Director General of Police, Bangalore Metropolitan Task Force, Karnataka. Mr. Purushottam Sharma, Additional Director General of Police, Madhya Pradesh. Prithvi Raj, Additional Director General of Police, Armed Force and Training, Shimla, Himachal Pradesh. Major General R.C. Padhi, Additional Surveyor General, Military Survey. Mr. Pavan Duggal, Advocate, Supreme Court of India and President, cyberlaws.net. I would hand over the session to Mr. Anil K. Sinha. Sir, if you could kindly take forward the session. Mr. Anil K. Sinha. Yes. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon to all of you. I can see the challenges of a post-sumptuous lunch session, you say. I think the hall is still sort of half empty. I suppose the organizers have to really take into account this and not offer less than sumptuous and very delicious lunch, you see, if they really want to make this session function like a business, you see. Anyway, let's get on with this session. I suppose we are late by about 30-35 minutes already. The topic is cybersecurity, public safety and disaster management. And I'm supposed to chair this. I think what I'll do, I can see that there are many eminent speakers in this session. So I will not really say many words right in the beginning. I am not really a man of IT or the cyber security. I have interfaced with this only as a user, you see. So I have some understanding of this, but it's still not much, you see. I work in Patna in Bihar State Disaster Management Authority, which is a statutory body set up under Disaster Management Act 2005, passed by the Parliament of our country, you see. And I think I'll talk to you later as to what do we do and what is this whole field of disaster management. It will be good if we can have the eminent speakers who are already here to address the distinguished gathering here. So may I now, first of all, invite, I suppose, Mr. Satinder Singh, Secretary Excise in Present Government of Jharkhand, is not here. Is he here? No, it seems Mr. Singh is not here. So we'll go ahead with the next speaker, Dr. Rajveer P. Sharma. He is Additional DG of Police, Bangalore Metropolitan Task Force, Karnataka. And he will speak on cyber security, public safety, etc. So, Dr. Sharma, please.
Chairperson of the session, Mr. Anil Sinha, my friend Purushottam Sharma, Major General Padhi, ladies and gentlemen. This topic, cyber security, public safety and security and disaster management, was the initial topic communicated to us. And I thought there could be a lot of common kind of content in our talk. So I spoke to the person concerned and I said I will limit to the public safety and security, particularly its financial dimensions. I joined service about 25 years back. That was the era where all of us know there was no cell phones. The STD booths, where ISD booths were coming in India, and most of the surveillance was done, which was of the human nature, or to the some extent by interception of the phone and interception of the letters. Time change. In early 90s, technology explosion in India also started taking place. The computer networking also came into the place. But one thing which did not alter in the entire scenario was financial aspect of the, or financial allotment from the governments, or probably financial input in the security exercise. 9/11, all of us know, there were a lot of articles and there was a talk. How safe is America and what is the cost of the safety and security of the America? This led to all of us to have some degree of introspection. Where do we stand? There are many things which we all will agree, but I will just go to the one slide. Now this slide depicts a picture where per capita expenditure on hard security, leave aside other component, is $2,141. In India, armed forces spend about $30 per year on our security. And you will be amazed to know, per capita, internal security expenditure, which basically police provides, per year is $7 per month. Now, these figures, probably many of may like to dispute it, that we provide almost 1 rupee per capita security per day. And what are the dimensions of the security? Physical security, cyber security, property rights security, all kind of securities we are to cover. Since the scope of this discussion is vast and wide, I brought this subject probably to instill some kind of understanding of the budget provisions which we are having for the security in this country. Now, with this budget, what we are expected to do? We have to prepare ourselves to have a response plan, train employees, share information between organizations, review the evidences, incident management system we should keep in the place. We should have a preventive mechanism of all kind of crime, which is probably governed by 980 statutes in this country. Detect and minimize the impact of the security breaking attacks. We should have the scope of incident and know what all could be the angles related with that incident, and then we have to respond on a real-time basis. These are all the requirements for a country which is crossing probably 120 crore population. This all has to be done. Now, cyber security, when we talk, alone in a city like Bombay, there are about 9,000 networks which can be accessed by anybody and can be used. We have very limited control on these computer networks or internet networks. Now, controlling such networks or preventing access or retrieving the data requires a specialist team which probably somehow or other, despite all of our efforts, we have been able to access not more than 2% of the internet-driven data in this country. You all would have heard that we are soon going to have access to all the servers of companies which are transmitting like Yahoo, Google, and all those companies, and we will soon able to access this data as by way of legislation which Government of India is going to soon bring in, and that will lead to probably availability of all the information. These things are easier said than done. Unfortunately, if you go by the 9/11 report which Americans with a lot of diligence prepared, and they had a lot of action taken plan after the report, they said every data was available with us, but we could not utilize the data for identification of the persons who are likely to impinge on the security system of the US. As a follow-up measure of this report, consultants were appointed. Their job was to retrieve these data, analyze it, and give into the actionable form to the security forces or the various agencies involved in this task. Despite all this, the recent assessment which I had the occasion to meet the FBI director, he said 30% of the data we have been able to analyze. So it is such a voluminous task that we know certain data which are of very little consequence we are rejecting by doing a preliminary inquiry. And 30% data we are focusing. Now, this is the stage where probably they spend about $2,000 per capita on the hard security, and soft security component is different. It is said that $628 trillion is the cost of keeping the US safe. Now, the problem is this: when last 25 years, when we look back, the security system or the policing system or internal security system of the country was a low-cost venture. We used to provide security by spending very little money on it. The growth of the IT technology, information technology, has both positive and negative impact. The positive impact, everybody has been interlaying, real-time basis you transfer, connectivity has improved, but at the same time, the cost of keeping some kind of surveillance has also simultaneously gone up, and we have probably not able to keep pace with that. Whenever we talk of the private establishments, business establishment, why they are interested in doing these things. One slide is missing in this last slide. Just go behind. No. No? Okay, let's leave it. The business establishment tend to find the answer why they should do something. We, other stakeholders who have to buy the technology, have to look from whom we should take. And probably those who have to decide have to look what cost we should buy. Now this cost and the quality, these two things have caused a great disharmony. Unfortunately, if you look over most of these outsourcing deals in India have come under some kind of dispute, scanner, or the problem, because always a contemporary time cost reference gets distorted when you see the things after many years. And people start talking in retrospect that this could have been done, that could have been done. I am not sure whether some of you will recollect Kargil War. The Bofors which we imported, which we bought from, which we brought in India, the famous gun. We had to buy its ammunition from so-called the black market or the grey market area, because somehow or other we thought the decision of buying the Bofors was a bad one, so we should stop any kind of agreement with them to supply the ammunition, and we had to buy with the black market, and all that stories are well known to most of the people. This only gives a feeling that most of the time, bringing in technology, what people think at that particular reference point, subsequently there is a tendency to change the decision. And that is one of the reasons most of our purchase procedures have been delayed. Large number of the funds which come from the government of India to us, despite the fund per capita income being low, are not being utilized, because taking such decisions people find extremely difficult, and this gives a probably hole in our safety and security environment. The Bombay blast which recently took place, there was a lot of talk about the resolution of the CCTV cameras. Now, all of you would have dealt, the Britishers when they left India, they left India as a country of shopkeepers. Large number of technology which we get into government is from the private sources. It is by way of the vendors. And most of the people definitely have some reason to make financial benefit, because after all they are running the company. To amalgamate those things and to scrutinize those things, in-house mechanism is not that effective or cannot be that effective, because the technology is changing at a very fast pace. So with the result, most of the technology inflow in our government organizations is vendor driven. The people come, they push in their technology, and naturally whatever they have got, they want to push in and sell it. We don't have what is called as a system of standardization of this technology inflow even today on the place, whether it is police forces, armed forces, or the government of India's other establishment. And whether can we ever achieve this standardization of inflow of technology, I don't think it will be ever possible to the tune of 100%, but we may improve over the period of time. Now, there has to be a healthy balance where errors have to be excluded from the domain of the malafidity. And as long as errors are bona fide or very close to bona fidity, they have to be forgiven if we have to bring in technology in our security and safety environment. Unfortunately, the protections which most of the government establishment had gradually has gone diluted. So if you look at the modernization funds in most of the government establishment, particularly in the police, are going underutilized. So there has to be somewhere giving scope for the error margin, and could be somewhere then we have got the technical bidding in the e-governance, e-tendering and other things. We can incorporate some people from the consultant or outsiders who can judge the issue better. However, there is always a time lag in these issues when we start doing it. So when we look at the security scenario of this country, probably somewhere lies one basic issue: per capita cost of the security setup. I had one Director General of Police who used to very frequently tell, of course not fondly, with a lot of despise, that in Allahabad railway station, the cost of one datun, I don't know how much you follow, a twig of neem or something, cost 1 rupee, and the cost of the security in this country for per capita basis, we are spending only 1 rupee. So with that kind of input, how we can provide foolproof or wholesome security, that is the issue which we have to probably ponder. There's a lot of truth behind it. And unfortunately, the security inflow of the fund and the threat perception which we are, there is a gradually gap is widening. And there is some degree of rationalization in some countries who cannot keep pace with it, that they have accepted certain degree of breach of security as way of life. The Spain is a very famous example which we talk. When they talk of war on terror, they joined initially, and there was a bomb blast in the train killing 192 persons. There was a change of the government. The government developed some kind of understanding from the people who were causing deleterious impact on the security fabrics of the country. And now Spain is living very comfortably. There had not been much of the incident. There are high surveillance countries like UK. They are paying a huge cost and their economy is in a bad shape. So somewhere, some countries have found they have worked out a method to deal with it. And probably in India, we have yet to take a stock which way we have to go. But of course, larger thinking remains that we should develop a security system which should be infallible. We should provide a public safety, and security and safety, when we talk, probably in a wider spectrum of the entire public safety, security is one of the component, it's a very limited component. And as policeman, I thought I will only talk about the security scenario, because the public safety is a much wider area. So we have to work it out to develop an infallible security system. Since we are only 3 or 4 panelists here out of 5 or 6, so I thought I took a little longish. Anyway, with this my few words and my presentation, I thought if there's anything you would like to ask me, you are free to ask. If you are not asking, still I'm okay. So I leave it to you to raise any issue on this subject. So, nobody's...
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. May I have your name?
I am Ramakrishnan.
Yeah.
I'm currently advisor in NISG.
Advisor in?
NISG,
Okay.
National Institute of Smart Government.
Okay.
I must say that I thoroughly enjoyed what you said, a lot of plain speaking and practical data. Quickly, starting from the numbers of even when you particularly talked about, when you ask Yahoo, Google, everybody to post and share the data in the Indian servers, etc., you're going to be tons of data and you can't handle it. Now, what the US government does is, very recently, maybe a fortnight back in California, there was a conference of the top-notch people in the security conference, including academics in industry. Satellite phone was a very important, a lot of papers were there in that. Bombay, there was a satellite phone. So these kind of issues are, therefore, when you're sitting in the front line as a cop, you cannot handle it. Because the tracing back in the technology movement, you need the support of academics, you need the support of industry, and you need the support of a lot of people. So I think the bipartisan consortium building on a continuing constant basis, by whether you fund the academia or whether you constantly keep in touch industry, go out and seek them, please provide the following things for me on a continuing basis. So this approach is very important to me as we go forward looking at 5 years, 10 years. More closer to the other point about equipment, procurement. Now, CCTNS, is it a project which is giving all of you in the different states a procurement mechanism which is efficient and helpful? That's a simple question.
Mr. Ramakrishna, I'll be candid in telling there is a gestation period expected of any project, and there is a lifespan of the project. I'm not going to comment on anything. After all, I'm a serving government official. If a gestation period of a project is bigger than the lifespan of a project, probably we have not done any justice with that project. Now, all these projects should have a very longer, much longer lifespan than the gestation period, and there had been few project precursors of the CCTNS where we collected data. We wanted to migrate the data into CCTNS project. Unfortunately, the migration of the data still has not taken place that way. So, without going to the specifics, I will say one thing, that the technology lifespan is too short and the cost is too high. If we are looking for anything which is called as a foolproof or 100% outcome of our efforts, we will have to be really very, very budget intensive or financial intensive into this project. In case if we are going to have a compromise approach, that yes, I will give bare minimum, I will define a bottom line, I will not look for 100%, probably better methodologies can be worked it out. Now you look, all these technology which we see have got a span of 5 to 10 years. Within 10 years, you find technology to be virtually getting outdated. And most of the computerization program which in India have taken place in government establishments, they have remained only the program. The retrieving of the data and using those informations had been done on a very, very limited basis. This is my frank confession and admission before you. Many of you will know it, many of you know it, and many of you will agree with me. But some who do not agree with me, maybe they are too modest.
My name is Avitosh Tripathi. I am from CMC Limited. I look after e-governance industry practice. And I must compliment you for the keynote presentation because it shows us certain things which are not easily visible to us. And to this extent, what I could understand was that our per capita expenditure on security is very, very less. Be it military or be it internal policy. And possibly we cannot afford to go to the kind of per capita expenditure which the next guy is making, this China, which is something like $75 to 30 of ours. It is a luxury which we cannot afford. And if that is true, then the resources which are available to us are that we work for a smarter ways. And that is where I find that adoption to smarter ways, and IT is possibly one of the smarter ways, there could be many other. Adoption to that is very slow. There are huge barriers and resistance pockets, and that is where we are reaching a situation where the basic security is also not available. So I would like you to comment upon this. I mean, what are some of those ways and means?
Mr. Tripathi, you will be a bit digressing on the way the economic policies and the foreign policy of the country probably have many solutions of low per capita expenditure on the security of the country. There are countries like you look at Singapore, Sweden, landlocked countries, who do not have a very high budget on the security, but they have probably developed a mechanism of what is called as a strong or a different kind of foreign and economic policy. And with this policy, they have been able to compensate the security environment, particularly in the global context. Now, with regard to the internal security context, without providing the hard security in the changing scenario is a bit tough, and you will have to spend money for that.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. I think The time management
It's very,
is something which we cannot miss, otherwise that would be the worst disaster. So, thank you, Mr. Sharma.
oh, thank you very
I
much. Thank
think
you
you've
very much.
given a very good account of the cyber security scenario in the country, the challenges, the very wide-ranging challenges which the police system faces, in our system, and the kind of inadequacies which are there in terms of budget provisions, in terms of adoption of the technologies, and a whole host of other issues. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. May I now invite the next speaker, Mr. Purushottam Sharma, he is Additional Director General of Police, Madhya Pradesh. Mr. Sharma, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Chairperson, my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. When you talk about security and public safety, you may remember, or something must be coming to your mind, or some department's name must be coming to your mind. What is that? It's the police, isn't it? Primarily, they are concerned that they should provide security, they should keep you safe. When it comes to your mind that it is a police department, let me tell you in a nutshell, because you have come after such a wonderful lunch, and it is a difficult task for any speaker to, take the whole group along. How police functions? I can summarize this by saying that it functions like A, B, C, D, E, F. They always, A stand for avoid. They always avoid. You go to the police stations, they will avoid registering your crime. No point. And if you force it and they cannot avoid, they will be bypass. They will send you to the senior officer or junior officer, but they will not do it. And if you really go for a bypass, then they will go for C, that is confused. They will confuse by the rules and regulations and laws, because we have plenty of laws. This is a country with many, many minor laws. As a police officer, I deal every day. Cyber law has also come. This was a law for trade, but it has come on us. Truly so. We wanted this law for us, and it has become for us. And if you fall into the C, that is confused, and you are still smart that you are not confused, then they will go for D, diffuse. They will accuse you. They say that I am diffusing this problem. Okay, I agree. And then comes the E, that is execution. But the worst part is, then when E is done, they also go with F, that is forget. They never remember. We don't learn that what we have undergone. So this is a background, maybe just to keep you a little high in energy, but that is how the real life is. Because as a senior police officer, this is what I have seen. Because at many places, the things are not as good as they perceive to be. You think that this is a department which is providing you security. This is the department which is giving you the safe life. I think there are many doubts. There are many things. There are many, emotional challenges, or maybe kind of provocations must be coming to your mind. But I'll take you to this journey. That how we are, as a police officer, not able to provide you the security. And once the cyber is added, I will add the IT component it. So my whole deliberation will be focused on how IT implementation has not adequately addressed to the public safety. And I will only focus to the criminal tracking. If the criminals are not tracked, the security is breached and the life is not safe. Will you agree on this? Okay, so having said this, I'll take you to this journey and I'll say you how the criminals are tracked. We have brought out the IT. We have lovely system which has been implemented. The CMC will come and speak to me and ask many questions because they have done something to us. The system called as FIS, Automatic Fingerprint Identification System. And I, being the chairman at a national level, I really studied the system which is existing in all of the state and all police organizations in this country. We have 22 systems existing in the whole country. And since the police is a state subject, every state has got its own FS. Not a problem. Okay. So background is FS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System. What this system does, it really, somebody says that what is IT? For me as a police officer, I take IT is nothing but a tool which is changing the business process. The business remains the same, only the whole process has been re-engineered, and we have come to a most modern way of functioning it. Earlier we used to take the fingerprint with a black ink, used to store it, do Henry classification, and also do the manual verification. This was a system which was existing, started in West Bengal. India is a pioneer, and it is one of the best systems, I tell you. I've studied on fingerprint, written a book on that. It's a most wonderful system in which no two fingerprints are the same. The faces can lie, but not the fingerprints. You can morph, you can, change your face, do some surgery, but not with the fingerprint. So they are unique. Now we have many more biometrics, which also I will suggest you later on. But what has really gone bad in FS system in country? So FS have been installed in 22 states. The worst part is no two states are having interstate or inter-FS connectivity modules. Everybody is working in isolation. No data portability and interoperability, even amongst the various versions of the same vendors and the FS of others. That means the irony is when I had gone to one of the states where there were two centers within the same state, these two centers within the states were not handshaking. There was no data transfers which was existing. In Madhya Pradesh, we were having the same system in the neighboring state called Andhra Pradesh, but there was no data portability from Andhra. There was no data connectivity. We tried a lot. Capability to search chance prints were miserably poor. 22 states have capability to state and search palm print, but this was not available. Systems are not complete package. However, this was nothing but a package of R&D. And no FS were the way best except the Gujarat. The CMC has given the latest version in Gujarat. This has been the scenario. Why I talked about is that somewhere there are many loopholes which are leading to the non-fulfillment or compromising positions so far as the security or tracking of criminals is concerned. These were the benchmarking which I did. Now, what has been the fallout? Fallout has been around 8.8 million fingerprints recorded at Central Fingerprint Bureau at NCRB, around 1.8 million, that means 18 lakhs record of FS of 21 states are lying underutilized. Because the thing is, there is absolutely no system of sending it to the NCRB. And also there was no system of capturing. You have provided the system, but the live scanners were not there at the police stations. Lack of data portability in international standard. Everybody has got their own standard. Somebody in FIP format, others in that format, third in that format. But the international standard called NIST was really missing, miserably missing. Up to year 2010, chance print traced at Central Fingerprint Bureau were only 9. And Madhya Pradesh contributed a lot in that. With this system, only 9 people, the chance print have been traced. That means at site we captured the chance print and 9 criminals have been caught. Casualties are Maharashtra, they are going with a new system once again after purchasing. Madhya Pradesh is going in a new system. NCRB is going with a new system. Blah, blah, blah is happening. So that means it's no value for money. Now with this, I have suggested a system called benchmarking, so that all lot of systems are existing. They can come to a one platform. That's a minimum standard. And this standard is added to the NCRB. And this is needed because the CCTNS, everybody must have heard the name, because this is a mission mode project for the police. Crime and Criminal Tracking Network System, phase 2 is coming, and also the advanced solutions are coming. Advanced solutions are coming for city surveillance, there are MBIS, national MBIS, there are data terminals, blah, blah, blah. So the FS system, the tracking system, has to be very good. In case the CCTNS has to succeed, we should have a much better tracking system. Interstate connectivity has to be arrived so that all states can share the data, because the criminals are freely moving. Criminals have got no defined zone that they will be acting in this particular, or they will be operating in Delhi and will not be going to Mumbai. No, they can go anywhere in any part of the country. Uniform Unicode demographic database. This also I studied, that if one state has got a demographic detail in one format, other state has got a different format, and there's absolute no coherence between these two. And you have to achieve to that uniform demographic details. Web interface should be provided so that even the SHO goes to the remote area and can access this. Palm print, document cases, because there are a lot many muster rolls which are coming, and a lot many complaints of frauds are reaching to the police. So document examinations should also be facility. This was the background. So we brought out the benchmarking document, in which the functionalities have been defined as a core functionality. Core functionalities are one on which there is no compromise. They are the essential part of the FS system, and they were data conversion tool, fingerprint data acquisitions, image processing tool, image enhancement tool, roll print identification, chance print, palm chance print identification, solving previously unsolved chance print cases. Solving previous unsolved cases, blah, blah, blah. These are basically the core functionality I defined and also documented and given the weightage. Apart from this, there were general functionalities. General functionalities are also important. However, they are not as important as the core functionality. Okay. These two functionalities have been defined, and the document has been circulated to all the states, and also we have given them a training. Now, third part was how system has got the good speed and how accurate is the system. So this also, we have tested the system on the accuracy and speed point of view and given the weightage. And the whole benchmark document has been put on website. It is there on the website of NCRB and circulated to all, and the training provided to every people. These are all my part of my documents. With this background, what I did, that okay, I agree that we need to have a system so that the fingerprint data, which is needed for tracking the criminals. I'm only talking because fingerprint biometrics is accepted as per law. However, I'm also suggesting two more biometrics. One is a face, another is iris, because a UID has also been taken, but the government is asking for some modification or changes in the law, which are undergoing. But having said this, this was a model which has been suggested so that our security and the criminals are tracked, so our safety is assumed. So the middle one, this middle one is an NCRB model. This will be connected to all the SCRB MBIS. The MBIS will be upgraded to the benchmarking status, and also we will have a connectivity with the CBI and National Investigation Agency, and we are also thinking to provide some interface with the database, if it is permitted later on, so that identification information can also be obtained from UID or whatever database available with us. This has been the core concept. Thank you so much. Any question if you want right now, or if you want in the end? You're most
I
welcome.
think from the point of view of time management, may I suggest that we have the questions and answers at the end of the session, you see.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Sharma. I think for giving a very extensive account of, the system of tracking of criminals and how to use these fingerprints and all that. I hope, there will be many questions to Mr. Sharma later on. May I now invite Major General R.C. Pathi, he is Additional Surveyor General, Military Survey, to kindly make his presentation.
Thank you, Chairman, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation will be the importance of geospatial technology in e-governance and disaster management. I am basically a military cartographer, and recently I completed my MBA in disaster management, so I thought the combination will help me in giving something and on my favorite topic of geospatial technology. But before I touch upon that subject, let me introduce how the geospatial technology was in place in the country. The geospatial technology in the country, it started with the creation of Survey of India, which is the oldest scientific organization established in 1767. So when the Britishers came, so there was nothing called a map, and what was available was the vivid or the rough sketches which was prepared by the various travelers. But as you know, as a human being, we are more interested to know about our Mother Earth, and the governance or whatever you say, it is based on their location. Even the king, they wanted to add more and more villages and more areas. Similarly, the Britishers, they wanted to know what is the country. For governance, they want to earn revenue and for other things. So the terrain or the geospatial thing was the most important factor. So during Clive Lloyd, this mapping started 245 years ago, and at the time of independence, the entire country was mapped on 1:50,000 scale. Subsequently, the maps got metricated. But before independence, basically the maps were used by the defense, not much used for the real governance for the civil society. But after independence, the need for the governance became very important for your developmental planning, city urban planning, for disaster management, for your for establishment of industry and many other things. So the government policies also got modified. So SS was given to the public, SS was given to the other civil government organization, non-government organization, through various policies with various methodologies, which was earlier not available during the British time. Now, the technology has moved really very fast with the digital technology. The geospatial products have also increased. From a normal paper map or a thematic map, we have got something called digital topographical database. So entire topographical data, it can be put in a digital format. We can create a digital elevation model, digital terrain model. Then the space technology also added the satellite images, the aerial photographs. And then we got the latest GIS hardwares and tools, which could create very fascinating applications very suitable for governance. Just for your example, very recently, we created the 3D GIS for the Delhi government, which is very popularly known as the Delhi Special Data Infrastructure, which we created. My Survey of India created for that. And more cities are going to be covered in future. Every day, the technology is advancing, and as a result, we have got the facility of doing the utility mapping also, which can be added to that, using ground penetrating radar. So particularly in the Delhi mapping project, we utilize this technology, and which was very successful. So there is another project called National Urban Information System, in which we'll also be creating high resolution maps with a lot of value added information. Now, I just give you a brief background about what kind of geospatial products are available and what is the geospatial data. Now, I come back to the disaster and how both are related. Particularly in our country, we are prone to so many types of disasters: flood, earthquake, tsunami, you name any disaster which is present in our country. So it does occur now and then. Now, we have suffered a lot, both economically and casualty-wise. And the real solution to manage the disaster lies with the effective utilization of geospatial technology. There are various organizations, and there is abundance of geospatial data, like Survey of India, Forest Survey of India, NATMO, Census, Central Water Commission, Groundwater Board, Department of Space, and so many organizations, National Hydrographic Office. And all this data can be taken as an input for our geospatial technology. And some of the important applications are your geographic information system, the remote sensing application systems, and the ground positioning systems. Now, here if you see, all these data we can build once and use many times. That means once we have got the base data, subsequently we just need to know what is the change detection, what changes has taken place, pre-disaster and post-disaster. Just to repeat or revise those who do not understand what is GIS technology, it's nothing but the entire geospatial data which is stored or captured in a system, in a computer system, which is geographically or spatially referenced. The data is stored there, retrieved, and it is managed for various applications. The beauty of this GIS is that it integrates satellite images, aerial photographs, UAV data, ground field data, map data, area analysis study, etc. So that means it helps us in understanding the problem, analyzing the problem, and then giving us a solution or an idea how to do that. So these are some of the GIS applications which can be utilized other than your normal, in e-governance as well as in disaster management, fire, police, emergency services, finance, building, utilities. So there are many applications. Using the GIS tool, also we can simulate the 3D situation or the 3D modeling of your terrain, and we can create a visualization, which in governance parlance we also so many times call the common operational scenario or common picture. So we can generate a common picture so that the different wings of the government can see the same picture or same scenario. Further, it can also be effectively utilized in training, creating various simulations and modeling. The technology further provides integration over an enterprise. That means the photogrammetry, 3D visualization, geospatial, and everything, it can be integrated as an enterprise solution, so that the enterprise architecture gives you facilities like whether if you want map service, if you want feature service, or you want any data management application and things like that. So the users have got a choice in that. The advantage of this geospatial integration is that we can integrate the meteorological data, the soil survey data, the geological data in a common with respect to their location. And that becomes very effective in governance and disaster management. So basically for this, we need to create a geospatial infrastructure. Right now, we have got some organizations have been created, like we have got national level, we have got the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, but it is basically helps in policy formulation. But we need to create a geospatial infrastructure in which all the geospatial data producing agencies, they contribute, and there need to be one organization who should have the absolute power to hold on to the data and develop applications for various user groups. Similarly, the technology has advanced in giving us high resolution images. This particular slide, if you see why we require high resolution images, as the resolution increases, the information content is more. Combination of different sensors and technology is utilized for your urban planning. Like here, this particular slide, it shows how the urban laser scanner and digital camera together can create a 3D model of a city. This is another slide which gives a similar indication about the urban planning. Here, these are the same kind of applications for modeling of the towns and cities. So different sensors, different platforms, and we have got technology where the data can be fused together. It gives you the enhanced information or enhanced quality of the information. This is another thing, using the same technology, we can do the hydrographic simulation, basically for flood estimation, or which are the areas which are likely to be inundated during a flood. So we can create a flood management system using geospatial technology in a GIS environment, using input like maps, images, and things, and other ground-based information. Now, if you see here, in a disaster scenario, we need to acquire a lot of geospatial data from various platforms, the aerial camera, the UAV, and from various sources. But all these, we need to put in a spatial data infrastructure so that the change detection is on real time. We need to know what are the changes taking place so that disaster managers, they can assess the situation. My basic idea was to give you an insight how effective is the geospatial technology, and my presentation was just an overview of that, and how effective is the geospatial technology in governance and particularly in disaster management. But however, every technology will always have some hiccups. Like you buy a car, so it's not that that is the end of your problem, because the car may develop some problems. So, and you need to take the car to service center periodically. You need to do many other things. Similarly, if you really have to be, apply the geospatial technology for effective governance and disaster management, then we need to change the policies, modify the policy in tune to the time. although the government has been doing it, but in a democracy, the policy changes is slower than the technology. Technology moves much faster. So it has to be done in a mission mode, as a mission mode project. And particularly when the space technology is advancing at a much faster pace, we are getting, every day we are getting higher and higher resolution data and data acquired from different sensors. So integration of the data fusion, and then data standards, data content. So there are many issues, technological issues. The technocrats have to take care of that. The bureaucrats have to take care of the policies. And the geospatial industry, particularly, they have to be Indianized. Most of the geospatial products or equipments are imported. So the moment you import things, you don't have full control over that. So our Indianization process needs to be taken care of by the geospatial industry with the support of effective government policies. And at the same time, the teachers, the universities have got a major role to produce more and more geospatial experts or geospatial scientists. Because as of now, the infrastructure available for this is quite limited. So basically what I suggest is that it has to be a joint effort with the National Mapping Organization, industry, the data producers, the researchers, academia, universities, so that we can have a very effective geospatial tools, applications for effective governance, disaster management. Thank you.
As disaster management hasn't really been covered, in much detail, and maybe so cybersecurity and public safety also. I think these are very, very wide kind of fields. But I am thankful to the three eminent speakers, you see. Let me talk to you more about, disaster management. Friends, like my previous speakers, I don't have the power of the PowerPoint presentation, you see. Nevertheless, let me try to pack some traditional power, through my voice or my body language into whatever I'm going to say. See, as I said, I work in Patna with Bihar State Disaster Management Authority, which is a statutory body created by the Disaster Management Act 2005, passed by the Parliament. This has been a landmark legislation in the field of disaster management because this is the first such action taken by the country. There was no law on disaster management, even though this has been traditionally, and historically, a part of the public administration ever since the public administration, came into being, you see. The Constitution of India also does not mention about the word disaster management, you see. That is very surprising. Even though you must have heard of relief departments in these states, there are relief commissioners who have been there. Of course, now the designations and the functions have been changed to a great extent. So that way it has been a very landmark development in the country. The Act also created the institution of National Disaster Management Authority. I'm sure many of you have heard of that, which is located in Delhi and it is chaired by the Prime Minister of India. It has a vice chairman full-time who is in the rank of cabinet minister, and it has 7-8 other members who are experts in various fields related to disaster management, and they all have the rank of Minister of State. And the National Disaster Management Authority is by and large vested with the responsibility to come out with policies, come out with overall plans, and more so guidelines and norms and standards for managing disasters, you see, in the country. And then the Act also created the institution of the State Disaster Management Authority, And now every state is legally bound, by the law to have a state disaster management authority, which is to be chaired by the respective chief ministers and then other, members, etc. of the body, The state of Bihar adopted the same pattern as that of National Disaster Management Authority. Unfortunately, the Act does not lay down a very clear-cut pattern. It has very general terms that there would be state disaster management authorities chaired by the chief minister, who would nominate a vice chair and then some members, etc. But who would be these vice chair or members, that has not been really spelled out by the law, But the state of Bihar decided to adopt and follow the pattern of National Disaster Management Authority, So Bihar is the only state where there is a full-time working, vice chairman, that is myself, and there are full-time, 2 members. We have a secretariat and office of our own. There are many states in which these authorities have come up as kind of cabinet subcommittees, because CM is the chairman by law, and then CM they have nominated some ministers as the members, etc. So it has become kind of a committee structure, which is not very, very sort of effective, But nevertheless, I think India is a country, with all kinds of variations and patterns. It is said that we also live in different ages. And you just heard our colleague saying that, even within the same state, what to talk of interstate connectivities and, navigations. But even within the same state, people are not really shaking hand, as it was said, But let me again go back to the Act. Another important aspect of the Act is that it also created the important institution of district disaster management authorities. Hitherto, the district systems of preparedness and response to disasters have been led only by the district magistrates or the collectors, And they had a relief section. But now this body has been enlarged, sort of institutionalized. It is headed by the district magistrate, but it is co-chaired by the Jila Parishad chairman, and then the superintendent of police, the civil surgeon, the chief medical officer, the executive engineer of the buildings department, and then many others, including civil society. They are members of the District Disaster Management Authority. I think which is a very, very good development. But they need to be institutionalized. They need to really grow. Their capacities need to be built, etc. The last point which I want to talk about the Disaster Management Act is the very definition of disaster, As I said, this definition did not exist ever, even though traditionally relief administration or disaster management has been a part of the public administration, for ages. But for the first time, disaster is defined as a catastrophic event or mishap, etc., happening because of natural causes or man-made causes or by accident or by negligence, and all those activities which have adverse environmental impact on the local area. So that way the definition of disaster has become very, very wide and kind of open, from natural to man-made to negligence by accident, etc., etc. And many times I shudder to think of the challenge ahead, Even natural disasters, which traditionally we have been sort of, geared to sort of managing. I'm not really saying managing, but sort of managing. I don't think we are really confident to say that the country is prepared to face natural disasters. Be it the kind of, tsunami in December 2004, or the Bhuj earthquake in January 2001, or many other disasters, which have taken place. And add to that, things like, the Mumbai, the attack 26/11, and things like that, whole host of things, you see, or it is air accidents, you see, or the road accident, you see. They are one of the biggest killers in the country, and yet I don't think nationally, collectively, we are really being serious about, managing these traffic and road accidents, etc. There are these statistics which say that number of people killed in road accidents are much more than all other disasters combined annually, you see. And there are figures, you see. Many places I have been going in Bihar to different divisions where DIGs tell me that, sir, in my area, this thing is 3 times, you see, not just double of, combined to all other disasters, which is something very, very unfortunate. But I take some hope from the fact that we as a country and as a society have leapfrogged many stages of development sometimes, you see. And I hope that, with the IT, with the space technology, the remote sensing, the GIS, the GPS, the whole host of technologies, which have emerged, you see, and which, of course, are tremendous resource, provided we are really able to, use them, exploit them to the best possible advantage, you see. Maybe there would be solutions, for not just one disaster, but sort of many disasters, because ultimately, in the ultimate reckoning, a lot of things which we do for one disaster, they are also applicable for other disasters, you see. Now, how does that happen? Let me tell you, see. I don't know how many of you have really had personal experience of facing or being involved or managing a disaster, you see. I don't know how many of you have experienced, the 18th September 2011 Sikkim earthquake, you see, which was felt in most parts of North India. Those coming from South India, of course, would have only heard of it, you see. But I'm sure you have heard of, what happened in Japan in March 2011, you see. You may have also heard of what happened in Haiti and Chile in 2010, you see. Now, if we take a look at, what happened in Japan, you see. It faced one of the worst events of the human history, you see. An earthquake 9 on the Richter scale, which is literally unprecedented. Maybe just a couple of other events would have been of that magnitude, you see. And that was followed by a tsunami with 40 feet high, waves. And then the third disaster of nuclear plant, crashing, you see, kind of. You see. But do you recall, I'm sure many of you would recall, horrendous pictures, and videos which came on the TVs of this 16th March, I think it was 2011, of this event in Japan, you see. But what was remarkable was the way the society responded, you see. The way the people responded, you see. There were absolutely no chaos, no anarchy, no panic also, you see. I mean, it doesn't mean that people they faced it, but very peacefully and in a very orderly manner, you see. There were videos of NHK, which is their national media, which I remember, you see, where people are first assessing, looking at each other, then looking at the, other articles in their hall items, fans, etc., you see, or other things which are hanging, and then make an assessment as to how serious is the shaking, you see. Is it the kind of usual, because Japan keeps shaking like California almost every day, every moment, you see. And then when they realize that, no, it is something serious, then they start taking the action, you see, of duck cover, going to corners and below some tables, etc. And something which was remarkable was that even in that situation, I could see that one employee, one staff, at the last moment, even as he's trying to go under the table, but was typing, the last bit of message, which he wanted to go for the broadcast, you see. Now, let me tell you apart from this, that no building fell there despite this kind of an earthquake, you see. And no people were killed because of the earthquake, you see. They lost about 25,000 people, but that was all because of tsunami. All the pictures of tremendous damage and cities and airports and, cars and ships, getting totally swept away was all because of the tsunami, you see. Even tsunami, they had been prepared but for an earthquake up to the magnitude of 8 on the Richter scale, but not 9, which went beyond their expectation, you see. In terms of economic damage, of course, they have lost, I don't have the figures, but I think it may even touch trillions because of their level of development. But then what is most remarkable is the way they responded, and including children, schools, homes, elderly people, old people, vulnerable people, people who are especially challenged, etc., all that, you see. Compared to that, if you look at Haiti, 2010 January, an earthquake of around 8 on the Richter scale, the whole country was, decimated. The presidential palace crashed, you see. The president was literally on the street, you see. He could just barely manage to save his life. They lost nearly 260% of their GDP, you see. And comes 2 months later on, in March, same kind of an earthquake in another adjoining country in the same region called Chile, you see. And there was almost no damage, you see. The event was of the same magnitude, you see. But no buildings, by and large, no people killed, no infrastructure lost, no public property lost, you see. No private property lost. So why did this happen? We have really tried to look into that, you see. And that is because 30 years back in Chile, they had another big event. And then after that, all those 30 years, they worked on many things, but 2 key things. One was public awareness and education. And second was safe construction, you see. And 30 years they went on doing that, whatever was required. And the result could be done. You go to Google, which I say Google Baba, who is too kind. You ask for one, it gives you 1,000 and confuses you, as to which link to really go. But any link you go with these, and I think you can get these statistics and a lot of details of this, interesting, at the same time, disturbing also, you see. But then if we look at India, you see, in Gujarat, you see, we were not at all prepared for the Bhuj earthquake, you see. And which is one of the better off states in the country. 1993, we have had Latur earthquake in Maharashtra, followed by 7 years of World Bank project, which did a lot for Maharashtra. And yet in terms of sharing of lessons, it was shocking. In fact, in 1997, Building Materials Technology Promotion Council of the Ministry of Urban Development, they came out with what is called a landmark publication called Vulnerability Atlas of India, which was based on 4 disasters: earthquake, cyclone, floods, and strong winds, you see. It gave district by district account of their vulnerability. It showed that whole of Bhuj district was in zone 5, which is the highest seismic zone in our country, you see. And despite this, the lessons from Maharashtra had not traveled to Gujarat. In those days, I used to work as the Joint Secretary in charge of disaster management in the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, you see. And on 26 January 2001, when the Bhuj earthquake took place, around 8:45 in the morning, by evening, in less than 2 hours, by around 8 o'clock, I was in Bhuj by the first Indian Air Force aircraft, which was sent by Government of India, along with 24 doctors from AIIMS and Safdarjung, and medicines and drugs, etc. And then from IMD, India Meteorological Department, you see seismometers, and then satellite phones from Ministry of IT, etc., etc. But our satellite phones did not work in the night around 2:30 when I had done my recce and was supposed to report back to my secretary, you see, as to what was the situation, you see. Because communication, which is of a great priority, but somehow is the first victim, you see. And 8:45, this event takes place, the communications go down. In the whole day between that time and 3 o'clock, that was 26 January, Republic Day parade, etc. At 3 o'clock, when the National Crisis Management Committee met under the Cabinet Secretary, literally about a kilometer from here, you see where the President's house is there and the Cabinet Secretariat is located. You see, the Government of India had no news about the severity and the magnitude and the extent of what had happened in Gujarat, you see. They knew from IMD that something serious had happened. That was on the media also, you see. But not in terms of extent, in terms of magnitude, in terms of, severity, seriousness. So how do you mount your response, you see? How much? It can be too less or it can be too much, you see. And that is when they took this decision that let somebody senior enough go and take a first-hand look and then report back so that the Government of India could really come back, with that kind of a situation, you see. Satellite phones didn't work, my dear friends, because the batteries were not charged, you see. And then attempts were made from Jeep battery and things like that, etc., you see. Anyway, you see, now, I think in the last 10 years or so, there have been major reforms in this sector, coming with the Act and policies and NDMAs and SDMAs and DDMAs, etc. Talking of disasters, you see, let me give you a broad scenario that when a disaster happens, then one aspect is the immediate response, you see. How to respond, which I was telling. Where the communication is very important, where the corporate sector, the industry, etc., have a tremendous role to play, you see. I'm not elaborating on that, but I'm just saying I'm sure a lot of you can understand the kind of roles which it has been put to use in many countries, and I think we are aware of the potentials. It's a question of connecting and plugging together, you see. Going and talking at the national level. Of course, NDMA is doing a great deal of service. They've come out with about 30 guidelines. If you go on their website, that is all available, you see. Guidelines on various aspects of disaster management, you see. You go to various SDMAs, they have their, what they are doing, etc., you see. So IT, the response is very important, where information technology, communication, etc. But then power is something which is very important. Power goes down, you see, communication goes down because of that. That is one aspect, you see, response. Emergency operation centers are a very important aspect of response, you see. And we have to have a state-of-the-art, as it is said, emergency operation centers, because whole lot of agencies and departments and players, they are called into action, you see, in a major situation, you see. Whole lot could mean 30, you see. It could mean many more also, you see. In a Bhuj-like situation, you could be dealing with maybe 500 agencies, you see. Because there are teams who have arrived from maybe 30 countries. There are maybe 300 or more NGOs. This Government of India on the, state government tell us what is the situation, what do you require, this and that. And the state government with all their departments practically, with police and fire and civil defense and home and medical, etc., all that. How do you coordinate that, you see? How do you respond in a planned manner? Do you again create another man-made disaster, you see, by messing up the whole thing, which is what unfortunately has been happening, you see. So that is one aspect of response, you see, which is very, very important. There are good practices and best practices, whatever you call them, across the globe about state-of-the-art emergency operation centers, where again power, IT, communication, databases, their security, cyber security, etc., which has been talked, they have tremendous role, you see, to play, you see. GIS, GPS, in fact, that is the way it can. You can literally zero down on any. If Bhuj, whole of that district, which is the biggest district in the country, was affected, now how do you go to Rapad, how do you go to Gandhidham, how do you go to another place and look at that and the various layers of infrastructure which has been affected, etc., etc. All that is possible, you see. But then the second very important aspect is of mitigation, you see, and risk reduction, you see. And risk reduction mitigation, they are long-term things. Risk reduction, traditionally, you see, we talked of relief administration, then we talked of disaster management, but now globally we are talking of risk reduction, you see, which is identifying the risk in advance, assessing the risk, you see, analyzing the risk, you see, and then strategizing and making your plans to deal with the risk, you see. And I think that is where public awareness education, I think, is of tremendous importance. I keep giving a very crude example about the importance of public awareness, which seems to be a very soft kind of area. A lot of us here perhaps deal more in the hardware kind of things. That if somebody is standing behind me with a pistol and wants to hit me, you see, how do I take action to escape, or reduce that risk if I don't know about this risk, you see? I have to have a system, or I have to have the glass, of the James Bond, you see, who even looking in this direction is able to see what is happening behind, you see. So I think the very first step towards risk reduction or disaster mitigation is public information and education, which is where we in Bihar are trying to do a lot. I wish, now I'm thinking that I should have used some power of the PowerPoint by bringing to you some photographs and some snippets of what we are doing. But let me suffice to say that, we are focusing a lot on children, on women, on elderly people, on vulnerable sections of the society. We have taken a few decisions in our authority meeting, which are chaired by the Chief Minister, that every office in Bihar will have an office disaster management plan, you see, which is started with a small exercise we were doing for our own office, you see, and then CM said, let it be done for all. The next step is going to be a home disaster management plan, you see, on which we are working. So that is for streamlining. As far as the developmental process is concerned, our Department of Planning and Development has already issued a circular on mainstreaming. Let me just give you an example. 400 children were killed students were killed in Bhuj. Why? Because the school buildings fell down, you see. 179 people, including patients, nurses, doctors, visitors, paramedics were killed because the district hospital just sat down like this in that earthquake. So the whole question is, do we need a development of that kind? Hospitals or the schools or roads or bridges, they are all milestones of development. I'm sure we don't need any school. I'm sure perhaps I'll appeal to you and request you when you go back and you send your children to school, please sometime go to the management and ask them, is your building safe, you see. Delhi is in zone 4. Most of you coming from various parts of India would know perhaps your vulnerability, your this. If you don't, please go to Google Baba or go to NDMA, or the SDM of your own state. They will advise you about your this, you see. But do ask, some simple questions like you suddenly fall ill, you see, you go to a hospital, you see. Do we ever ask that this building of the hospital, is it safe? Or is it a building like the district hospital of Bhuj, you see? I'm sure you don't want to go to a hospital building of that kind, which will kill you rather than give you life, you see. So friends, I'll now conclude. I've taken a lot of time, though we are not exceeding the original time allotment of our session, you see, by just saying two things, you see. I believe a lot in terms of individual, preparedness, you see. After 9/11, the Time magazine of 23rd June 2008, you can note in case you are interested, the cover page itself says how to survive a disaster. There are 3 case studies, you see. But the summary is it says that in the time of a disaster, there are 3 kinds of personalities of everyone which emerges, you see. First kind of personality is that in which people freeze, you see. You just freeze. जो हिंदी में कहते हैं माथा सुन्न हो जाता है, you don't do anything. You are a mute spectator to whatever is happening, falling, something hitting you. You just don't know what to do. So you suffer. The second kind of personality is of those people who overreact and panic, you see. And therefore, you must have seen videos and pictures of people holding hands together and jumping from 10th floor or 30th or even 50th floor, you see. They know what is going to happen, but they have panicked and they cannot control, their behavior, you see. Fortunately, there is a third kind of personality also, which is of those people who know what to do, you see. But they also know how to do. Because not just the knowledge part, but also the action part, you see, is important. And how to do comes with training, mock drills, rehearsals, and all that, you see. That is something which you should be doing in your organizations, all the corporate sectors. You have to look into whether your BCPs, business continuity planning, business continuity management, they are there, they are really shared, there is a greater, larger ownership of those plans, and whether they are practiced, through mock drills and such exercises from time to time, you see. So let us all resolve that, we train ourselves to belong to the third category, where we know what to do and we also know how to do by practice and regular drills, etc. Finally, let me close by two slogans which we have adopted in Bihar. First is about preparedness and second is about long-term development. The first one is, आपदा नहीं हो भारी यदि पूरी हो तैयारी. आपda is disaster. आपदा नहीं हो भारी यदि पूरी हो तैयारी. It can be serious, but it will not be too serious, you see, यदि आपकी तैयारी पूरी है. And second is, विकास ऐसा हो जो आफत से बचाए. अगर ये विकास है एक बढ़िया होटल दिल्ली के सेंटर में, तो ये विकास ऐसा होना चाहिए जो हमें आफत से बचाएगा अगर अभी अर्थक्वेक आएगा तो. और विकास ऐसा हो जो आफत न बन जाए, उसी. हमें ऐसे स्कूल्स और हॉस्पिटल्स एंड ये नहीं चाहिए जो कि किल करेंगे हमारे बच्चों को और पेशेंट्स को और रात दिन उनको लाइफ देंगे. सो थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर योर वेरी पेशेंट हियरिंग. Thank you, friends. Now, as chair of the session, maybe, in case there are questions from our eminent panelists, you see, and from myself, kindly, the floor is open. So, thank you.
Can I ask a question for you? Yeah, sure. The Bhopal, I belong to Bhopal, and Bhopal has witnessed in past the worst gas disaster. In which 1,000 and 1,000 people died in the night. Looking to the experience of that gas disaster in Bhopal, the police came down and became the sitting duck. Many people died. So with that background, the question to you is, sir, who could be the first respondent? Number one. Number two, if the police becomes a first respondent, the police can only control the crowd and maintain the order. But in many situations, police is not having the competencies to handle many of the disaster. Say, for example, the gas disaster and many more. Third question, do we have a standard SOP, like standard operating procedures in a variety of disasters? The type of disaster and the SOP followed for that. Fourth, are we really prepared for the disasters which are likely to happen or based on our learning? Fifth, these are all connected because this is really, fifth is the most important is, God forbid we do not have, but in case we have a gas and nuclear disaster in future, are we really prepared for that? Thank you.
Shall I answer now, or will there be a couple of more questions then we can take together? Can you please take the mic and make yourself...
It is basically something which is supplementary to what Sharma sir had to say.
Close to yourself.
Yeah. basically interconnectivity in the sense that communication and interagency communication and intersystematic communication, which is likely to be the first casualty but nevertheless is the most needed, is very important from the point of view of addressing or responding to a disaster. Now, my question to you, sir, first of all is that is there any protocol between the various disaster management agencies which are existing in the country?
Okay, thank you. Let's take one more. Let's take one more question, then we'll try to answer.
My question is related to, sir, actually I very much appreciate all the speakers and also the chairman for throwing light on so many issues and also coming out with some solutions also. One important question is public awareness involving common man is no doubt, and collaboration, because terrorists and underground elements or whoever may be, they are collaborating irrespective of the nation or region or whatever may be, they are using the latest state-of-the-art technologies also. Such type of collaboration is absent, leave aside the industry and academia and R&D institutes, even among the government agencies. That collaboration is still absent and long-term planning is also absent. Now, leaving aside these comments, my question is, when the local bodies are responsible for permitting a construction of, let us say, hospital or a school or whatever may be, even a house also, when a particular building is being permitted by a local body, is there any law to punish them for giving a certificate or permitting such structures in earthquake zones? Because now technology is available to construct even in a zone, high-risk zone also, earthquake-resistant structure. So, is there any law to punish?
Okay, I think let us try to answer. You know, as far as the responder thing is concerned, with all due respect to my police colleagues, you know, I mean, in between two Sharmas, two additional DGPs, very strong presence, you know. I also feel strengthened, you see. But despite that, let me say that I think community is the first responder, you see. It is correct to say that because police in any case, police is in a way first responder as far as the, the system is concerned, you see. But I think basically it is the people who are the first responders, you see. If you are prepared, if you know what to do, you know, your family knows what to do, then you do immediately take that action, you see. I used to work in Japan a couple of years back. I was visiting India, living in Gurgaon, you see. I think 2006 or so, there was an earthquake in the I don't know, dead of the night, you see. You people may recall, I don't recall the month and all that. You know, suddenly we were on the 6th floor, it was shaking, you see. Yeah, 2005 or 6, you know, something like that, you see. And then, you see, the complex in which we live, there are, you know, 600 families, 600 odd families living, you see. Now, whatever action is required, 6th floor, 16th floor, all that, you know, you got to do it first yourself, you see. I remember, you see, my father was, you know, now he is no more, he was in mid-80s, you see. He suddenly got very nervous, you see. And he wanted to go to the toilet, you see. But then how in that situation, you know, you can see the things are still shaking. But then I said, Father, I'm just, you know, at the gate, please don't even lock, I'm here, you see. At the same time, my daughter-in-law, who was, you know, in the family way, she got totally nervous, you see. She was panicking, you see, the kind of personality which I was describing. Left to herself, she would have run, you know, from the staircase, you see, and maybe hurt herself. But then I just held her, my wife was also there, that please just keep standing. There was this door frame, I said, let us stand here, you see. This can save. That is one of the recommended things, you see. And somehow those 40 seconds or something like 50 seconds, it shook, it subsided, and then slowly, after ascertaining that immediately it is not going to perhaps not shake again, there is no way, but then we slowly, came down by the. Otherwise, if you panic, you see, you can harm yourself much more, you see. And which police system in any country, you see, talk of any country, can reach within those minute or two, you see. Impossible, you see. So that is a system, you see, that will come on the scenario in a different manner, you see. But people are the first responder, community is the first responder, invariably, that must be recognized, that must be strengthened, you see. That is one thing. As far as the preparedness are concerned, now there is a system of SOPs. In fact, Government of Bihar, for floods, we just observed Flood Safety Week. We have decided that every year, first week of June, will be observed throughout the state as Flood Safety Week. Because by the end of the June, monsoon breaks. And then, the season starts, you see. And there are SOPs now, which have been done by our Department of Disaster Management in total collaborative manner, participative manner, you see. So that is there. The law enjoins on the governments to prepare the state disaster management plans, you see, organizational plans, district plans, etc. So you see, it's all a question of doing it, When you ask how much prepared we are, one has to look into various things, you see. Collaborations, as I said, there is a huge area of collaboration between industry, corporate sector, and the government in not only the response part, you see, which is very, very important, where seconds matter, minutes matter, as far as saving lives are concerned, you see. Tremendous databases, you see. Patna, I keep raising this question, that is Patna, there was an air crash in 2001, you see. Fortunately, even though it was in a habitable area, but the losses were, human lives lost were very few. But we could have been, the situation could have been far worse. It can affect a few thousand immediately, air crash, just imagine. You see. Is Patna prepared for a mass casualty? Is Delhi prepared for a mass casualty, you see? I'm not too sure. It's only in 2012 that, our national government and Delhi had a mega mock drill, you see. At least that beginning is there, which is good, you see. Then construction safe and municipal, I think that's a very good question, you see. Again, you see, it is the municipal authorities which pass the maps, you see. And they have the enforce, when passing, they have to make adequate provisions in their municipal laws. National building codes exist, you see. They are also perhaps in the public domain, you see. In Bihar, we have reviewed as an authority the municipal law of Bihar, you see. We have had extensive discussions with the Department of Urban Development. Extensive, suggestions have been made. They have been incorporated. Now the law in the process of amendment, you see. And I hope the same thing would take place in all parts of the country, in all the municipal bodies, you see. Thank you so much. I think in case we don't have any questions, I'd like to conclude, and I know the time pressure on the organizers would be there. Yes, sir. Last question, please.
One line of comment. Many of the questions which people raise, the creation of NDMA has not been referred. At least 2-3 questions, the creation of NDMA has very precisely to address those issues. One of the panelists asked the question about the policeman, am I the person who will do the SOP? If you look at the NDMA and the various events and advertisements and the website, and they keep on advertising, if this is so, the following so. So if you look at the hierarchy of referrals, they provide the high. They are not a substitute for community. They are not going to spoon feed you in an emergency.
Sure.
But they do give you very different nuclear. Yes. They tell you what to do. Similarly, various kinds, they are very busy doing many things, creating different documents, white papers, advertisements, toolkits. They walk road shows, they do many things.
Sir, I couldn't agree more. You see, NDMA, I referred to it extensively, and I said that there are 30 guidelines on their websites, which are very, very valuable documents. But then nevertheless, I totally agree with you that, community is one. NDMA also has to work for recognizing that community is the first responder. We need to work with the communities in terms of strengthening them and enabling them to really respond, effectively and efficiently in times of disasters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha, for moderating the session, and thank you, speakers, for a wonderful and insightful session that we have. I would like to invite Mr. Anil K. Sinha to kindly present our speakers with mementos. Major General R.C. Padhi. Mr. Purushottam Sharma. And Dr. Rajveer P. Sharma. I'd like to invite Mr. Purushottam Sharma to kindly hand over the memento to Mr. Anil K. Sinha. Thank you, panelists, for the session.